Okay, I think it's time for a little bit of a confession. I've been losing steam with my quilting lately, and mainly it's because everything just feels really expensive right now, especially since Joann's closed down. Basically, I have to be really mindful about how I spend my quilting budget, so this year I want to focus on smaller projects. And I'll still make larger quilts, but probably just not as many. I should also spend time finishing some of my UFOs too. I think that would be a good use of my supplies. So I've set myself a little bit of a challenge. I'm calling it my Mini Quilt Challenge. Very creative name, I know. But basically every month I'm going to be making a mini quilt, and I'm hoping that it'll help me use up some of that quilting energy I have built up without breaking the bank or my budget. And I'm going to try to use free patterns as much as possible so you can follow along if you want. Side note though, I am terrible at challenges. I don't know why I set them for myself because I often forget about them. Hopefully that won't be the case this time. Anyway, this month I'm going to use the Mason Jars quilt pattern by Ruby Star Society as inspiration, and there's a link to the pattern in the description of this video. And when I'm saying I'm using it as inspiration, I basically just mean that I'm using all of the same measurements, I'm just making less blocks. I also have a couple ideas that might help me personalize the pattern, but I'm not sure if I'll get that far. So, let's get started. The beauty of this quilt is that you can really let your personality shine through with the contents of your jars. They can be funny, they can be pretty, they can be scrappy, whatever speaks to you. You could fill your jars with novelty prints or random scraps. You could fill them with crumb blocks or traditional blocks. So there's just a lot of room for creative expression with this one. So as you can see up here, I have all my background cut out, my lids cut out, and the upper part of my jar cut out. But I can't seem to decide on what I want to fill my jars with, so I just have a mess of possibilities down here. I could go very bold and use this part of the panel and cut out my 5-inch squares from here and fill my jars up with those. I could use a charm pack. These are already the exact size that I need, so I could just pick my favorite and not have to do any additional cutting. I have scraps here that I've used a lot, and I wouldn't use these too, because they would blend in too much with that pink. See, there wouldn't be enough difference between them. I could do that. I could pick a theme, so maybe I would pick animals, and then I could go through and pick out novelty prints of animals and use that. Before I looked in my stash more closely, I was thinking about doing a nautical theme, but I don't have enough ocean things that would fit. The other thing I was considering, and this is the front runner at the minute, I think, is blues and navies. So I could use these, maybe the red panda one too for that nice pop of orange there. Maybe take that one out and use these three and just go on a color scheme instead of focusing on the theme of what's on the fabric. So I think that's the one I'm leaning towards at the moment, especially because pink and navy is one of my favorite secret combinations that I like to use a lot. So yeah, you know what? I think that's what I'm going to do. I am making a total of 5 of the jar blocks. So I have 5 of the lid pieces that are 4 inches by 1.5 inches. And then I have 10 of these little side pieces that are 1 inch by 1.5 inch. So I'm going to make them very simply just like this. Here are the jar fabrics I decided to go with. I've got the whales, dragons, this red panda, sea turtles, and moons. And as you can see, this was a scrap, so I didn't have enough to make it the full size. So I have a normal one here, my little one here, and what I ended up doing was just reversing the ratios. So this is 5 by 5 with a 3 by 5 piece, and this is 3 by 5 with a 5 by 5 piece. So it'll add just a little bit of variation to the finished piece. I am going to go ahead and lay out all of these pieces just so I can get a look at them before I sew to make sure that everything is oriented the way that I want, because obviously I want this to be on the bottom and this to be on top, and I want to make sure that this piece doesn't get flipped so I have an upside down red panda in a jar. And the same goes for anything that is directional. So that means the whales, the dragons, the sea turtles, but it really doesn't matter how this one goes. Okay, here are what the jars are looking like now. And as you can see, they're looking very, very blocky. So it's time to round those corners. These little squares are 1 1/4 inch. And I've drawn a line right down the center. And I put them on each corner like this. And since these squares are so small, I'm actually going to use a little bit of Elmer's stick glue to put in the corner over here that's going to be trimmed off. So as I place them down, I'm just going to put a little glue on the opposite side, not too much. Stick it down. And then by the time I'm ready to sew this line, that will be dry and it will stay in place perfectly. One tip that I always like to share when I'm doing this kind of sew and flip corner is that you don't want to sew directly on the line that you've drawn. You want to sew just to the side of it, just a thread width away basically. And that way when it comes time to flip this side over and it becomes the corner of your block, you get it just right. You don't have a scant corner or anything wonky going on here. So if you're sewing along, here's your needle right here, you want to go just to the right of the line, just barely. And I would suggest if you've never done these before, you try that out on a sample and test how it works straight on the line and right next to the line, and I promise you'll see a difference. I always have, and once I learned this tip, it made a huge improvement in all of my sew and flip corners. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to support this channel, check out my merch shop and buy me a coffee page. Okay, let's get back to the video. Okay, I have one last sew and flip corner tip for you, and that is to press towards the body of the block. So this seam here, press towards the center and not out towards the corner. And I also press before I trim. So I'll press it towards the center, back, and then the front. And then after I have a really nice press, then I will cut off the excess. Now I probably should say that this doesn't always work for every block because every block is different, but for this block I'm finding this is the best way to press. Okay, one last step. To finish off our jars, we need to add the lid. Couldn't be simpler. You just need to make sure that you add it to the right side of the jar. So make sure your lid is on top next to the jar piece and not accidentally attached to the filling, the jar filling, if you will. Okay? So here we go. That should be super fast. Okay, all of the jars are done and they're looking so cute. And I especially like these little dragons. They're just so little. I love them. Anyway, to finish this mini quilt top off, I need to add the sashing and the top border. And if you want to set your jars how I'm setting them, these pieces are 1 1/2 inch wide by like 9-ish inches long. And I didn't cut them to size because it just didn't feel like it. So I'm going to sew them onto here and then trim them down as I go. If you want to be exact, you should do 1 1/2 by 8 1/2 inch strips. And this top one is width of fabric by 1 1/2 inches. And I'm going to do, again, I'm going to trim that at the end because I didn't feel like measuring. I think, what was it, 30 something inches? So I'm going to do that at the end of the process. But basically, right now, I just need to sew a strip on the right side of every block. Okay, I sewed the sashing, I pressed towards the jar, I didn't trim yet, and this special block gets another piece of sashing on its left side. Okay, pressed, still not trimmed, and now I'm going to sew all of these jars together. And finally, the top border. Okay, my mini quilt top is all pieced and trimmed, but before I show you the front, I just want to show you the back, because I know I have at least one subscriber who likes to see the back of the blocks and quilts and things. So mainly I pressed my seams open this time, except when it came to the background fabric. So that's what it's looking like. Now let's go over to the design wall. So here it is in all its unfinished glory, and you probably noticed first off that it does not have a bottom border, and that's on purpose because I want it to fit up here above my door, and I want it to look like it's resting on the door frame and not floating above it, so no border. Originally, I was thinking I wanted to make little handmade labels for each jar, but then I got to thinking, what would I label them? At first I was like, oh, moon dust, okay, that's sort of cute. Dragon wings, okay, sure. But then I was like, what would I use for these actual real creatures without making it sound like I'm some kind of poacher collecting illegal parts, like red panda tail, turtle shell, whale blubber, It just seems sort of wrong now. I was also thinking maybe something like more abstract, like hopes and dreams and thoughts and prayers or something like that. But now everything I come up with just sounds wrong. So help me out here. Should I do labels? And if I should, what should I label them? That doesn't make me sound like a weirdo. I've also decided that I'm going to use this mini quilt to practice free motion quilting, which I am terrible at. So wish me luck. If you're interested, I will post the results on Instagram and on the Thimblestorm community page here on YouTube. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss upcoming videos. And I'll see you again real soon. Bye!